Picture this. You are a Mongol horseman in the year 1221. For the last 2 decades, you have been the absolute scariest thing on planet Earth. You have ridden from the frozen steppes of Mongolia to the burning gates of Central Asia. You have burned cities that were thousands of years old just because they didn't open their gates fast enough. You don't know what losing feels like. You don't even know the word for retreat because your Khan, Genghis, treats failure as a capital offense. You are a god of war on horseback. But right now, looking up at the jagged, claustrophobic cliffs of the Hindu Kush Mountains in modern-day Afghanistan, your stomach drops. You realize something terrifying. You aren't the hunter today. You are a rat in a bucket. The ground beneath your horse isn't the open grass plain where you are invincible. It is a jagged, rocky nightmare of shale and dust. Your composite bow, the weapon that conquered the known world, is useless here because the canyon walls are too steep and the angles are all wrong. You can't maneuver. You can't flank. You are packed shoulder to shoulder with 30,000 of your brothers, and you are all looking up. And from the rocks above you hear a sound you have never heard before. It isn't the scream of victims running away. It is the roar of men running toward you. This is the moment the myth breaks. This is the moment you realize that even the Golden Horde can bleed. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand why this moment in the mountains is so insane, you have to understand the sheer scale of the apocalypse that was happening in 1221. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarazmian Empire wasn't a war, it was an extermination event. Imagine if the United States military decided to invade the Roman Empire, but with 0 rules of engagement and a goal of total depopulation. That is what was happening. Genghis Khan was systematically erasing the Islamic Golden Age. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv, metropolises of art, science, and culture, were being turned into ash heaps. We are talking about millions of people butchered. The Mongols were efficient, industrial-scale killers. They were the terminators of the 13th century. The ruler of Khwarazm, Sultan Muhammad II, did what most rational people would do when facing the end of the world. He ran. He panicked, abandoned his people, and fled to an island in the Caspian Sea to die of pneumonia and shame. The empire was headless. The armies were scattered. The people were waiting to die. The narrative was written. The Mongols win, everyone else dies. That is the rule of history. But every rule has an exception. And the exception here is the Sultan's son, Jalal al-Din Mangburni. If the Sultan was a coward, Jalal al-Din was a force of pure, concentrated vengeance. He refuses to accept the math. He looks at the Mongol horde and he doesn't see monsters, he sees mortals. While his father is dying in exile, Jalal rides south. He goes to the jagged heart of Afghanistan. He gathers the broken scraps of the empire, Turks, Afghans, Persians, men who have lost their families, their homes, and their hope. He tells them that running is over. He drags them into the narrow valley of Parwan. He isn't looking for a place to hide. He is building a killbox. He knows that the Mongol war machine is built on speed and mobility. So he decides to fight them in a place where speed is impossible. He is about to teach the world a lesson that we still forget today. Technology and numbers mean nothing if you walk into the wrong neighborhood. To really understand the sheer insanity of what happens at Parwan, we have to rewind the tape. We need to look at the ghost of the Khwarazmian Empire. Before 1219, this place wasn't a ruin. It was a superpower. It stretched across modern-day Iran, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. It had silk, it had steel, and it had an army that made European kings look like they were playing with toy soldiers. The ruler, Sultan Muhammad II, called himself the Second Alexander. He genuinely believed he was the main character of history, but he made one mistake. He poked the bear. And in the 13th century, the bear was Genghis Khan. It started with a trade caravan. Genghis Khan, surprisingly, wanted peace. He wanted trade routes. He sent a massive caravan to the Khwarazmian city of Otrar to open diplomatic relations. The local governor, a man named Inalchuk, saw all that gold and silk and got greedy. He accused the merchants of being spies, seized the goods, and executed them. This is what we, in the history business, call suicide by stupidity. But even then, Genghis gave them a second chance. He sent 3 ambassadors to the Sultan to demand justice. He gave Muhammad II an off-ramp. Muhammad didn't take it. He shaved the beards of the diplomats and sent their heads back to Mongolia. In the culture of the steppe, this wasn't just an insult. It was a declaration of total existential war. When Genghis heard the news, he didn't scream. He didn't hold a council. He rode to the top of a sacred mountain, took off his hat, placed his face in the dirt, and told the sky, "I did not start this war." Then he descended the mountain and brought hell with him. The invasion that followed was less of a military campaign and more of a natural disaster. The Mongols moved with a speed that was physically impossible for the time. They covered hundreds of miles of desert that everyone said was impassable. They showed up at the gates of cities before the news of their arrival did. And Sultan Muhammad II, the Second Alexander, he folded. He had 400,000 soldiers. He outnumbered the Mongols significantly. But he was terrified of his own army. He was paranoid that his generals would overthrow him, so instead of gathering his massive force into a single hammer to crush the Mongols, he split them up. He scattered his troops into garrisons across different cities. He took a unified army and turned it into bite-sized snacks for the Mongol horde. Genghis Khan ate them alive. He went from city to city, isolating the garrisons and wiping them out. Bukhara fell. Samarkand fell. The Sultan watched his empire burn from the window of his retreating carriage. He spent the entire war running away, chased by a specialized Mongol kill squad tasked with hunting him down like a fox. He eventually died on a small, miserable island in the Caspian Sea, destitute and alone, buried in the rags of his servants because he couldn't even afford a shroud. But while the father was busy dying of shame, the son was busy loading his weapon. Jalal al-Din Mangburni was everything his father wasn't. He was young, he was furious, and he was competent. He had begged his father to let him take the army and fight a pitched battle on the banks of the Amu Darya River. The Sultan had said no. Now with the Sultan dead, the chains were off. Jalal al-Din declares himself Sultan, but he is a sultan of nothing. His capital is gone, his treasury is gone, his people are dead or enslaved. All he has is a name and a burning desire for revenge. He rides south into the Hindu Kush mountains, gathering the survivors, the hard men, the desperate men, and he prepares to do the one thing his father was too scared to do: stop running and start killing. Jalal al-Din knows a secret that the rest of the world has forgotten in their panic. He knows that the Mongol army, despite looking like a supernatural force of nature, is actually just a machine. And like any machine, it has operating specifications. The Mongol war engine runs on 2 things: space and speed. Their entire tactical doctrine, the famous feigned retreat, relies on having miles of open steppe to run away, turn around, and encircle you. They are essentially a swarm of heavily armed wasps. If you try to swat them in an open field, you die tired. So Jalal decides to take away their sky. He leads his army into the Parwan Valley north of modern-day Kabul. Now, when you look at Parwan on a map, it doesn't look special. But when you stand on the ground, you realize it is a geological death trap. It is a narrow, twisting gorge carved out by the rushing waters of the Logar River. The walls are steep, jagged cliffs that block out the sun. The ground isn't flat dirt. It is a chaotic mess of boulders, loose shale, and deep ravines. This is the anti-step. By positioning his army here, Jalal is doing something brilliant. He is nullifying the greatest weapon of the Middle Ages, the Mongol horse archer. A horse archer needs a smooth ride to shoot accurately. If his horse is stumbling over rocks or climbing a 45-degree slope, he can't aim. He can't rhythmically loose arrows. He is too busy trying not to break his mount's legs. Jalal essentially looks at the Mongol Ferrari and decides to drag it into a swamp. But there is a second layer to this trap. It's psychological. Jalal knows the Mongols are arrogant. They have spent 2 years winning every single engagement they have fought. They have wiped out armies 10 times their size. They believe they are the punishment of God. When you believe you are divinely ordained to conquer the world, you don't look at the terrain and think, maybe we should wait. You look at the terrain and think, it doesn't matter. Jalal camps his army on the high ground, blocking the northern exit of the valley. He has about 60,000 men, a mix of Turks and Afghans. This is a fragile coalition. These guys hate each other almost as much as they hate the Mongols, but for now, they are united by the terrifying prospect of what happens if they lose. They dig in, they sharpen their swords, and they wait. And sure enough, the Mongols take the bait. A massive scouting force enters the valley, sees the Khwarazmian army, and instead of retreating to report back, they decide to push. They see the narrow walls, the rocky ground, and the choke points, and they ignore all of it. They ride right into the throat of the valley. Jalal watches them come. He sees them struggling to keep their formation on the uneven ground. He sees the frustration on the riders' faces, and for the first time in years, he probably smiles. He hasn't just chosen a battlefield, he has chosen the execution site. The Mongols think they are marching into another easy slaughter. They don't realize they are walking into a meat grinder that has been specifically designed to jam their gears. Meet Shigi Kutuk. In the pantheon of Mongol gods, he is unique. He wasn't born into the Borjigin clan, he was found. Legend says he was discovered as a baby in a plundered Tatar camp, lying in a cradle lined with gold and silk. Genghis Khan's mother adopted him. He grew up in the shadow of the greatest conqueror on earth. He isn't just a general, he is the supreme judge of the empire. He is the man who writes the laws, and because he writes the laws, he believes in order. He believes that war is a rational equation. If you input Mongol army and subtract enemy resistance, the result is always total victory. Shigi has never lost a major battle. Why would he? He commands the most disciplined soldiers in human history. He looks at war through a lens of absolute superiority. When he arrives at the southern mouth of the Parwan Valley, he looks up at Jalal al-Din's forces perched on the rocky heights. A cautious commander would see the high ground and pull back. A cautious commander would try to lure the enemy out onto the flat plains of the Charikar Basin just a few miles away, but Shigi isn't cautious, he is arrogant, and in 1221 that arrogance is justified. He has watched empires crumble just because the Mongols showed up. He thinks Jalal al-Din is just another panicked prince who has backed himself into a corner. So Shigi makes the call that will haunt him for the rest of his life. He orders the advance. He sends 30,000 cavalrymen into the bottle. Now you need to understand the physics of a Mongol charge to understand why this is suicide. Mongol warfare is based on flow. It's like water. They rush in, loose arrows, wheel away, and rush in again. It requires space, it requires rhythm. But as the vanguard pushes into the Parwan valley, that rhythm dies. The ground is too broken. The horses are slipping on loose shale. The path is so narrow that the riders are knee to knee. They can't wheel. They can't circle. The fluid, deadly organism of the Mongol army solidifies into a traffic jam. Shigi Kutuk is trying to drive a Formula One car off-road. Up on the ridges, Jalal al-Din watches the Mongols pack themselves into the kill zone. He sees the frustration ripple through the Mongol lines. He sees the horses rearing up, spooked by the unstable footing. This is the moment the trap snaps shut. Shigi has committed his forces. He has surrendered his mobility for aggression. He assumes that the sheer terror of the Mongol scream will make the Khwarazmians break. He is waiting for the enemy to run. But today, the enemy doesn't run. They look down from the rocks, they draw their bows, and they prepare to turn the supreme judge's courtroom into a slaughterhouse. Shigi Kutuk thinks he is the predator entering a den. He is about to realize he is just meat walking into a grinder. This is the moment where the battle turns from a tactical mistake into a slaughter. Jalal al-Din looks down at the chaotic mass of Mongol cavalry struggling on the shale. He sees the horses slipping, the lines buckling, and the complete lack of momentum. In any other battle, in any other century, a commander would order a charge. He would send his own heavy cavalry crashing down the slope to shatter the enemy. But Jalal is done playing by the rulebook. He realizes that on this terrain, a horse is just a 1,000-pound liability. He issues an order that sounds insane to a culture built on the saddle. He orders his entire army to dismount. Picture the confusion. You are a Khwarazmian heavy lancer. Your entire identity, your status, your survival is tied to your horse. And your sultan just told you to get off and walk. But as you hit the ground and lock your shield with the man next to you, you realize the brilliance of it. By dismounting, Jalal transforms his army from a clumsy cavalry force into a wall of heavy infantry. They are anchored to the rocks, they have the high ground, and most importantly, they can aim. The Khwarazmian archers, now standing firm on the ridges, begin to rain hell down on the Mongols. This isn't the suppressed fire of horse archery, this is precision sniping. They are shooting fish in a barrel, and the barrel is made of granite walls. Down in the valley, the Mongol machine is breaking. You have to understand that the Mongol soldier is a light cavalryman. He wears silk undershirts and leather lamella armor. He is designed for speed, not for a standing brawl against heavy steel. Suddenly the Mongols find themselves in a situation they haven't seen since they left the steppes. A fair fight. Actually, it's worse than fair. It's a crush. The front lines are being compressed by the weight of the men behind them. They can't draw their bows to full extension because they are packed too tight. They can't maneuver their horses to escape. Jalal al-Din's men begin the slow, grinding work of pushing them back. This is no longer a battle of maneuvers. It is a shoving match with knives. The Khwarazmians, heavy with armor and fueled by the desperate rage of men who have lost their country, step forward. They stab, they bash, they kill, and they step forward again. The Mongols are shrinking. The invincible army is being physically compressed. Shigi Kutuk watches this from the rear, and for the first time, the math doesn't add up. His input was aggression, but the output is mass casualties. He tries to signal a retreat to regroup, but the valley is too narrow. The men in the back can't hear the men in the front dying. The panic begins to set in. It starts as a murmur and turns into a scream. The Mongols realize that the mountains aren't just terrain, they are a weapon, and Jalal al-Din is wielding them like a club. The sun goes down on the first day, and the floor of the Parwan Valley is paved with the bodies of men who thought they were gods. The next morning, Shigi Kutuk realizes he is losing the physics equation, so he decides to try a psychological one. He knows his army is battered. He knows that in a straight fight on this rocky terrain, his light cavalry is just soft tissue against Khwarazmian steel. So he reaches into the Mongol bag of dirty tricks and pulls out a classic. He orders his men to fashion dummies out of felt, straw, and spare clothes. They strap these puppets onto their spare remount horses and line them up on the ridges behind the main force. When the sun rises, the Khwarazmian soldiers look out and see a nightmare. To their exhausted eyes, it looks like the Mongol army has doubled overnight. It looks like Genghis Khan himself has arrived with the main host. Panic, cold and sharp, shoots through the Khwarazmian ranks. This is the paper tiger moment. The men start looking at the exits. They start whispering about betrayal and doom. They are seconds away from routing, which would have handed Shigi the victory he didn't earn. But Jalal al-Din doesn't blink. He rides along the front lines, screaming at his men to hold their ground. He points at the reinforcements and tells them to look closer. He points out that the new soldiers are silent. They aren't moving. They are ghosts made of grass. He effectively tells his army, they are lying to you because they are afraid of you. And that realization flips the switch. The fear in the Khwarazmian ranks evaporates, replaced by a white-hot fury. There is nothing more insulting to a soldier than realizing his enemy thinks he is stupid. The Khwarazmians realize the Mongols are desperate. The monsters aren't invincible, they are just con artists with good PR. Jalal orders the general advance, and this is where the soundtrack of the war changes. For decades, the sound of a Mongol army was the sound of coordinated terror, the whistling arrows, the thundering hooves, the silence before the strike. But now, as the Khwarazmians push down the slopes, smashing into the Mongol lines, you hear something new. You hear the sound of wolves yelping. The Mongols are being pressed against the cliffs. They are falling into the ravines. The disciplined silence of the horde breaks into chaotic, high-pitched screams of genuine panic. It is a massacre. The Mongol left wing collapses completely. Shigi Kutuk, the man who had never lost, the man who treated war like a chessboard, watches his pieces get swept off the table. He doesn't die a warrior's death. He turns his horse around and runs. The invincible judge of the empire flees like a criminal, leaving thousands of his brothers to be hacked apart in the rocks. The myth of Mongol invincibility doesn't just crack here, it shatters into 1,000 bloody pieces. The silence that falls over the Parwan Valley after the slaughter is heavy. It isn't the quiet of peace, it's the quiet of shock. For the Khwarazmian soldiers standing among the corpses, the reality is hard to process. For 20 years, the world had convinced itself that the Mongols were a supernatural event. Imams called them the scourge of God. Kings called them demons. You don't fight a hurricane, you hide from it. But as Jalal al-Din's men walk through the carnage, looting the bodies, they realize the terrifying truth. These demons have pockets. They have blood. They have bones that snap just like anyone else's. The psychological impact of Parwan is infinitely more dangerous to the Mongols than the military loss. A dead soldier can be replaced. A broken myth cannot. News of the victory spreads across Central Asia faster than a plague. It acts like a match thrown into a warehouse of gasoline. Cities that had already surrendered, cities that were living in terror under Mongol governors, suddenly wake up. In Merv, in Herat, in the ruins of conquered provinces, people start whispering. They can be beaten. The whispers turn into shouts, and the shouts turn into knives. Rebellions explode across the region. Mongol tax collectors are murdered in their beds. Garrisons are overrun. For a brief, intoxicating moment, it looks like the tide has turned. The invincible wave has finally hit a sea wall. And how does Genghis Khan take the news? You might expect him to explode. You might expect him to behead the messenger. But Genghis isn't a cartoon villain. He is a CEO of war. When Shigi Kutuk returns, battered and humiliated, Genghis doesn't kill him. He doesn't even scream at him. He takes him to the site of the battle, walks him through the geometry of his failure, and delivers a line that cuts deeper than a sword. He tells him, "You have been accustomed to winning from childhood. Now you have learned the bitterness of defeat." Genghis treats Parwan as a data point. He realizes his generals have gotten lazy. They have been fighting terrified enemies for so long that they forgot how to fight a brave one. He decides that the Jalal al-Din problem can no longer be outsourced. He gathers his main host, the Imperial Guard, the heavy hitters, the veterans who conquered China, and he begins to march south himself. But while the great Khan is calculating his next move, a tragedy is unfolding in the Khwarazmian camp. This is the part of history that makes you want to scream. Jalal al-Din has done the impossible. He has united the tribes. He has defeated the boogeyman. He is the hero of the Islamic world. He has the momentum to perhaps push the Mongols back to the steppe. But victory is a dangerous drug. Defeat unites people through fear. Victory divides them through greed. As the adrenaline of the battle fades, the coalition of Afghans, Turks and Persians stops looking at the enemy and starts looking at each other. They realize there is a massive pile of loot on the battlefield, and suddenly saving civilization feels less important than getting paid. The cracks in the alliance begin to show, and they are about to widen into a canyon that will swallow the entire resistance. You know the old saying, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory? Usually that's a metaphor. At Parwan, it was a literal historical event. The Khwarazmian army is sitting on top of the world. They have just wiped out 30,000 Mongols. They are swimming in loot. We are talking about mountains of gold, silk, weapons, and thousands of horses that the Mongols left behind. For a brief moment, Jalal al-Din looks like the savior of the Islamic world. He has the numbers, the morale, and the momentum to potentially drive the Mongols all the way back to the Gobi Desert. But then human nature walks into the room. The army isn't a unified force. It's a fragile marriage of convenience. On one side, you have the refined Turkic commanders, the Sultan's inner circle. On the other side, you have the wild, rugged Afghan tribesmen, the Khalaj, led by a chieftain named Saif al-Din Igrak. These guys are the muscle. They are the ones who held the high ground, but they are the reason the battle was won, and now they want their cut. The dispute starts over something so petty it sounds like a bad joke. It isn't about territory. It isn't about strategy. It is about a horse, specifically a white Arabian stallion found among the Mongol spoils. Both Saif al-Din, the Afghan leader, and Amin Malik, Jalal's father-in-law, claim the horse. Two grown men, standing amidst the corpses of their enemies, start screaming at each other like toddlers over a toy. In a functioning army, the commander would step in, cut the horse in half, or shoot it just to end the argument. But Jalal al-Din is young, and his political position is weak. He hesitates, and in that moment of hesitation, Amin Malik, the arrogant father-in-law, does something that changes the course of history. He raises his whip and strikes the Afghan chieftain across the face. The crack of that whip echoes louder than the entire battle. You don't whip a tribal warlord in front of his men. You just don't. It is a mortal insult. The Afghan camp goes silent. They look at Jalal al-Din, waiting for him to punish his father-in-law, to make it right, to show that justice matters more than nepotism. But Jalal does nothing. He is paralyzed by family loyalty. So the Afghans vote with their feet. That night, as the celebration fires are burning, Saif al-Din orders his men to pack up. And just like that, 30,000 soldiers, half of Jalal's army, walk away. They take their swords, their bows, and their anger, and they disappear into the mountains. Jalal al-Din wakes up the next morning not as the leader of a massive crusade, but as a man who has just lost 50% of his combat power because his father-in-law was a jerk. This is the tragedy of the resistance. The Mongols are a hive mind. They move as one terrifying organism. The resistance is a bucket of crabs. They are too busy pulling each other down to escape the pot. Jalal al-Din stands in the empty Afghan camp, looking at the dust settling on the horizon, and he knows it's over. He knows that Genghis Khan is coming, and this time there will be no high ground, no traps, and no second chances. He has won the battle, but he has just forfeited the war. The party is over. The celebration at Parwan is a distant memory, replaced by the thundering reality of 50,000 Imperial Mongol troopers riding south. Genghis Khan has stopped outsourcing the war. He is personally leading the hunt. And when Genghis hunts, he doesn't just want to catch you, he wants to break your spirit before he breaks your neck. Jalal al-Din runs. Without the Afghan tribes, his army is a skeleton crew. He races toward the Indus River, hoping to cross into India and disappear into the humidity of the subcontinent, where the Mongol bows might rot and their horses might sicken. But Genghis is faster. The Mongols' force march day and night, sleeping in the saddle, eating dried curd and drinking horse blood so they don't have to stop for fires. They cut off Jalal's escape route just as he reaches the banks of the river. November 1221, the Battle of the Indus. This isn't a battle, it is a last stand. Jalal al-Din is pinned. Behind him is the roaring Indus River, a mile wide and swollen with glacial melt. In front of him is the Great Khan, forming a crescent moon formation to pin the Khwarazmians against the water. There is no high ground here. There are no traps. There is just a flat killing field and the most efficient army in history closing the vice. But Jalal al-Din doesn't surrender. He fights like a man possessed. He leads charge after charge into the center of the Mongol line. He's trying to break through, to find a gap, to kill Genghis himself. The fighting is so intense that the Mongols, who usually rely on arrows, are forced to draw their sabers. It is hand-to-hand combat in the mud. Jalal cuts a path deep into the enemy ranks, getting close enough to see the Khan's standard, but his horse is shot out from under him. He mounts a fresh one and goes back in. He fights until his army is effectively gone, until he is surrounded by a ring of corpses, until the sun starts to set and the realization hits him there is no way out. This is the moment that turns a historical figure into a legend. Jalal al-Din rides back to the riverbank. He looks at his family, his mother, his wives, his children, who are wailing, begging him to save them or kill them so the Mongols don't take them. In some versions of the story, he is forced to watch them be captured. In darker versions, he orders them drowned to save their honor. History is blurry on the tragedy, but crystal clear on the escape. Jalal al-Din strips off his cuirass but keeps his sword. He mounts his fresh horse, a magnificent beast, and turns it toward the cliff edge. The drop to the river is 20 feet. The water is boiling with currents. The Mongols stop fighting. They watch. They expect him to yield. Instead, he whips the horse and launches himself into the void. Man and beast hit the freezing water with a crash that silences the battlefield. They go under.
Seconds tick by. Then, miraculously, the horse's head breaks the surface. Jalal is clinging to the mane, gasping for air, the current dragging him downstream. Mongol archers run to the edge, knocking their arrows, ready to turn him into a pincushion. But Genghis Khan raises his hand. "Stop!" The great Khan stands on the edge of the cliff, watching his enemy, the only man who ever truly beat him, fighting the river. He watches Jalal reach the far bank, climb out, unship his saddle, and shake his sword at the Mongols in defiance. Genghis turns to his sons, points at the wet, exhausted figure on the far bank, and says the words that every historian loves to quote: "A father should have such a son." It is the ultimate compliment from the ultimate killer. He doesn't see an enemy. He sees a mirror image of his own indomitable will.
When the waters of the Indus finally settle, the story of the Khwarazmian Empire doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a whimper. Jalal al-Din, the man who defied gravity, the man who made the scourge of God pause in admiration, spends the rest of his life as a ghost. He becomes a wandering warlord, a king without a kingdom, fighting pointless skirmishes across the Middle East. His end is almost insulting in its irony. He isn't killed in a glorious duel with a Mongol general. He is murdered in the mountains of Kurdistan by a random peasant who wants his jacket. It is a pathetic, lonely end for the only man who ever beat the Mongols in a fair fight. But the legacy of Parwan isn't about Jalal al-Din's death. It is about the crack in the armor. Before Parwan, the world believed the Mongols were a supernatural event, a punishment sent from the heavens that could not be resisted. Parwan proved they were just men. They bled, they panicked, and they died when you hit them hard enough. That knowledge gave hope to the rest of the world, even if that hope was bought with blood. However, the darker lesson of Parwan is about us. It is about the fragility of human alliances. The Khwarazmian army had the power to save their civilization. They had the strategy, the terrain, and the leadership. But they threw it all away because of ego. A civilization that had stood for centuries was erased from the map because two generals got into an argument over a horse. The Mongols didn't defeat the Khwarazmians defeated themselves. The Mongols just walked in to clean up the mess. Genghis Khan learned from this too. The Mongols never made the mistake of Shigi Kutuk again. They adapted. They incorporated heavy infantry tactics. They became even more efficient. When they returned to the region a few decades later under Genghis's grandson, Hulagu, they didn't just conquer, they obliterated. They marched on Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world, and they burned it so thoroughly that the Tigris River ran black with ink from the books of the House of Wisdom and red with the blood of the scholars. The destruction was so complete that the irrigation systems of Mesopotamia were ruined for centuries. The shadow of the Mongol horseman is long, and it covers the entire history of the Middle East. Parwan stands as a lonely monument in the mountains of history. It is a testament to what is possible when you refuse to be afraid, and a gravestone for what happens when you let greed take the wheel. It reminds us that unity is the only armor that actually works, and that even the greatest heroes can be undone by the pettiest of sins. If you found this deep dive into the brutal reality of the Mongol invasions fascinating, please help us win our own battle against the algorithm by hitting that like button and subscribing. It really does make a difference. And check out the video on your screen right now to see the next chapter in this saga. The fall of Baghdad, where the Mongols finish what they started. Until next time, remember, history isn't just a story about the past. It's a warning for the future.